The cabin had always been more than just a structure of wood and stone to my it was a piece of my family's soul. Carved out of the wilderness by my grandfather's own hands nearly 50 years ago, nestled at the end of a winding dirt road that most GPS systems refused to acknowledge, the place was as private as it was peaceful. It stood between towering pines that creaked in the wind, its weathered logs holding decades of memories. Summers filled with fishing trips. Winters spent huddled around the old stone fireplace, and countless evenings where my grandfather would tell me stories about how he'd built the cabin plank by plank. Coming back after his passing was bittersweet. I had promised him I'd keep the place in the family, to maintain it not just as a building but as a sanctuary. That Saturday morning, with the air crisp and the lake glittering just beyond the trees, I felt ready to finally begin the process of restoring the old place to its former glory. I parked my truck on the gravel drive, the crunch of the tires echoing through the stillness. Stepping out, I inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Birds chattered somewhere overhead, and the faint sound of water lapping against the shore reached my ears. I started unloading supplies from the back of the truck paint. Cans, lumber, tools, stacking them carefully on the porch. The cabin looked tired but sturdy, and I could almost imagine my grandfather standing beside me, nodding with approval as I prepared to take on the responsibility he had left me. For a few moments, I was lost in thought, caught between nostalgia and determination. That peace shattered the moment I heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching over gravel. I looked up to see a sleek black SUV barreling down the driveway. Kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air like smoke, the vehicle came to a stop with a jarring crunch, and out stepped a woman who seemed entirely out of place in this rugged setting. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, despite the shade cast by the trees, and her blazer looked like it had been plucked from a high-end boutique in the city. Her heels sank awkwardly into the gravel as she strutted toward me, her chin tilted upward in a display of self-importance, without so much as a greeting. She pointed at the cabin with a perfectly manicured finger. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the forest's tranquility. I blinked at her, momentarily stunned by the audacity. "Excuse me?" I asked, setting down the hammer I had been carrying. "This is my property," she said, her tone dripping with indignation. "I don't appreciate strangers trespassing on it. You need to pack up whatever junk you've brought and leave immediately." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Your property? This cabin belonged to my grandfather, and it was left to me. I think you've got the wrong place." Her lips curled into a mocking smile. "Oh, I don't think so." "Made an offer on this cabin last year. Very generous one, I might add. I was told it would only be a matter of time before I heard back. Clearly, the family didn't know what they were doing. So let me make this simple. Sell it to me now, or I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." Her confidence was staggering. She spoke with such certainty that for a fleeting second, I wondered if I had stumbled into some bizarre alternate reality. I shook my head, gripping the railing of the porch for composure. "The cabin is not for sale. It never was, and it never will be. My grandfather made it clear he wanted it to stay in the family, and I intend to honor that." Her sunglasses slipped slightly down her nose as she glared at me, revealing eyes that burned with irritation. "Listen," she snapped, "you clearly don't understand the opportunity in front of you. This place is practically worthless in its current state. Do you know how much money I could put into renovating it? Do you have any idea what it would be worth afterward? You're sitting on a gold mine. I'm offering you the chance to walk away with a nice fat check instead of wasting your time with patchwork repairs." I crossed my arms, refusing to be swayed. "It may be worthless to you, but to me, it's priceless. No amount of money can replace what this cabin means to my family. So no, I'm not interested in your offer." Her face flushed with anger, and she let out an exaggerated sigh. "Unbelievable. You think some rundown shack is more valuable than actual cash? Typical. You're probably one of those sentimental types who clings to useless traditions." She jabbed her finger toward the cabin again. "Well, I'm telling you right now, if you don't leave this property, I'll call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." "Don't think I won't do it." The sheer gall of her words left me speechless for a moment. She was threatening to call the police on me, the legal owner of the property, while standing in my driveway. I let out a slow breath, reminding myself not to let anger take control. Go ahead, I said evenly. Call them. But you'll be wasting their time and yours. I have the deed right here in my truck with my name on it. This cabin is mine, and no amount of shouting is going to change. Her jaw tightened, and she stomped one heeled foot on the gravel. The sound oddly childish against the backdrop of towering trees. You'll regret this, she hissed. People like you never know what's good for them. I could make your life so much easier, but you're too stubborn to see it. Fine, have it your way. She pulled her phone from her designer bag with a flourish, already scrolling to the dial screen as she prepared to make the call. I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of the situation. Here I was, at my grandfather's cabin, simply trying to honor his memory and preserve what he had built. And a complete stranger had stormed in, demanding ownership, like it was her birthright. The forest that had always felt like a sanctuary now seemed charged with tension. The whisper of the wind in the trees drowned out by her grating voice and entitled posturing. I realized then that this confrontation wasn't just about property or money, it was about principle. My grandfather had fought to build this cabin from nothing. I wasn't about to let someone like her erase that. History with a single phone call? The woman's phone was already pressed to her ear, her manicured finger tapping impatiently. Against the side of her designer bag as she waited for the 911 operator to answer, I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, doing my best to appear calm, even though my pulse quickened. It wasn't that I feared the police showing up. He knew the cabin was legally mine, and the deed in my glove box was all the proof I needed. But still, the thought of wasting a sheriff's time because of some entitled stranger's tantrum made my stomach tighten with irritation. Yes, hello, she said into the phone, her voice suddenly dripping with exaggerated distress. I need the police immediately. There's a man trespassing on my property my cabin in the woods on Route 17. He's refusing to leave and is becoming hostile. She shot me a smug look as she added, please hurry. I don't feel safe. I almost laughed aloud at the theatrics. Hostile? I hadn't raised my voice once. If anything, she was the one who had stormed onto the property like a hurricane, barking demands and pointing fingers. I shook my head, muttering under my breath, unbelievable. She ended the call and snapped her phone shut with a triumphant smile. They'll be here any minute. You can either hand me the keys now and save yourself some trouble, or you can explain to them why you're breaking into someone else's property. I gave her a level stare. You're going to regret making that call. For a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes, hesitation. Maybe, but she quickly masked it with a scoff. We'll see. The next 15 minutes were heavy, with silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the pines and the chirping of unseen birds. She stood near her SUV, arms crossed, tapping her heel against the gravel like a ticking metronome. I sat on the porch steps, trying to stay patient, though the absurdity of the situation gnawed at me. When I finally saw the familiar flash of red and blue through the trees, I stood. Brushing the dust from my jeans, a sheriff's vehicle pulled up, crunching over the gravel, and an officer stepped out. He was middle-aged, with graying hair under his wide-brimmed hat and a calm, measured demeanor that spoke of years of dealing with small-town disputes. His gaze shifted between the woman, who immediately rushed toward him waving her arms, and me standing silently by the cabin. "Officer," she exclaimed dramatically. "Thank goodness you're here. This man broke into my cabin and refuses to leave. I told him I'd already purchased the property, but he's squatting here and threatening me." The officer raised a hand, motioning for her to slow down. "Let's just take a step back and talk this through calmly." His eyes turned to me. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" I nodded, already reaching for the glove box of my truck. "Of course, officer. This cabin belonged to my grandfather. It was passed down to me legally after his passing. I have the deed right here if you'd like to take a look." The woman's jaw dropped. "He's lying," she barked, her voice rising. "He's making that up to cover for himself. That's my cabin, and I made a very generous offer for it last year. They were supposed to sell it to me, I was told. It was practically a done deal." The sheriff held up a hand again, his tone firm. "All right, let's slow down. Ma'am, an offer isn't the same as ownership. Property doesn't transfer unless there's a signed and recorded deed. Do you have any paperwork proving this cabin belongs to you? She faltered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Well, not on me, she admitted reluctantly. But I don't need it. Everyone knows it was supposed to be mine. They just didn't follow through. By then, I had retrieved the deed from my glove box and handed it to the officer. He inspected it carefully, flipping through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a long pause, he looked up. This appears to be valid. It clearly states that the property was transferred from your grandfather to you. The record is notarized and filed with the county, unless there's other documentation proving otherwise. Which, ma'am, you haven't provided this cabin belongs to him. The woman's face flushed crimson. This is outrageous, she shrieked, stamping her foot like a petulant child. I called you here to remove a trespasser, and you're taking his side? Don't you know who I am? The sheriff's expression hardened. Ma'am, I don't care who you are. What I care about is the law, and right now you're the one. Trespassing and making false claims. Calling 911 to report a crime that doesn't exist is a serious matter. If you continue down this path, I'll have no choice but to cite you for filing a false report. Her mouth fell open in disbelief. You can't be serious. Very serious, he replied coolly. You wasted my time, and more importantly, you wasted emergency resources that could have been used to help someone in real danger. That's not something I take lightly, she sputtered, glaring between the sheriff and me, her composure crumbling. This isn't over, she hissed finally, snatching her sunglasses from her head and jamming them back onto her face. You'll regret not selling to me when you had the chance. The sheriff gave her a long, pointed look. I suggest you get back in your vehicle and leave before I decide to take this further. Consider this your warning. For a tense moment, I thought she might argue again, but finally she spun on her heel and stomped back to her SUV. Gravel flew as she slammed the vehicle into reverse and tore down the driveway, disappearing in a cloud of dust and indignation. Silence settled again over the clearing. It's broken only by the sheriff's sigh as he handed me back the deed. Sorry you had to deal with that, he said. Some people think money or entitlement gives them a claim to anything they want. Fortunately, it happens more often than you'd think. I shook my head, exhaling slowly as the weight of the encounter lifted from my shoulders. Thank you for coming out, officer. I didn't want to waste your time, but I also wasn't about to let her bully me into leaving. You did the right thing, he said firmly. Stayed calm, you had your paperwork ready, and you let the facts speak for themselves. She gives you any more trouble? Don't hesitate to call us. But something tells me she'll think twice before trying that again. With that, he tipped his hat, climbed back into his patrol car, and drove off, leaving me alone with the cabin once more. As I stood there, gazing at the old logs and weathered roofline, I felt a renewed sense of pride. The cabin wasn't just timber and nails, it was a legacy, one my grandfather had entrusted me to protect. And that day, in the face of arrogance and entitlement, I had stood my ground. The cabin remained where it belonged, with the family that had built it. The forest around me seemed to exhale with me, the tension dissolving into the breeze. I picked up my hammer again, smiling faintly. My grandpa always said this place would test me, and maybe in some way, it just had.